Welcome back, everyone, from the Wall Street Silver community. We have a special guest with us, David Collum, a professor of chemistry at Cornell University. Dave, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing good. How about you guys? I
Oh.
didn't expect to be in a foursome, but that's okay. We'll tee it up.
Hey,
Well,
it's Kinky here.
we're pretty excited to have you on, Dave. We also have Lee Justo and Jim Lewis from the Wall Street Silver community. We're gonna get right into it. Lee, Jim, who wants to start first?
I'll
Go
start.
ahead, Jim.
So, Dave, I've been following you for a while on Twitter, and I just love your comments all the time. They're hilarious and at the same time, informative, making me think. And I guess that's your job as a professor. So you're organic chemistry at
Right.
Cornell, but you've developed this reputation for macroeconomics, or economic commentary on Twitter and elsewhere. How are you making that switch from organic chemistry to everything else?
Well, I'm not actually switching. I still have a job and I
Yeah.
still have research and I still publish papers. So my whole life, I've always had something extra. So I've always, for a while I was, 14, 15 hours a day focused chem, but then, I took up Taekwondo for many, many years. And then I had kids, I had things that just distracted me. And around 95, I started paying close attention to markets. And I was so unaware of markets. As a kid, I talked finance with my dad. So I was unaware, but I had this amazing foundation actually, but I didn't know where to look up stocks. Oh, NASDAQ, what's that, right? It really started out from ground zero. And by mid 98, I'd concluded the markets were nuts. And so I started getting bearish and I emptied half my equities in July of 98. Then it all tanked. And then I said, okay, you're either an idiot or a genius. I don't know which. So when it rallied back, I dumped the rest. And so by mid 99, I was out.
Mm-hmm.
And once you go bearish, it's very hard to go back. So I took a big position in energy, which made me feel like a genius for about a decade. And then showed that I was really just lucky.
Well, that's
Over the
happening
years,
right there.
I developed a sense of, Wall Street being, full of liars and central banks being full of idiots. And so it's interesting. It's very complicated. I love complexity. My chemistry program is very complex.
Mm-hmm.
So that attracted me to it.
Well, one of the things that I thought would be an interesting question for you. You're a professor at Cornell, and one of the economic topics that's in the news in the past few months is this concept of debt forgiveness. This 50,000,
Right.
Who knows what the number might be, but the administration and the Congress that's currently in power, they're talking about a major debt forgiveness of 50,000 or less, or we don't know yet. And from the standpoint of what do you think it looks like, the optics of 75% of the population subsidizing 25% who have college debt? Only a small portion, a fraction of the country goes on for a college or university degree and takes on so much debt. Do you think it's really viable that we ask the rest of the country, the blue collar workers to the service workers, to pay for the college students' debt?
Not at all. Yeah, no. Nor is it even viable to ask people who themselves sacrifice dearly to pay for their kids or to pay for themselves to go to college. So no, that's wrong. We have a paradoxical problem, and that is the college debt is suffocating a generation who, if you beam yourself back 20 years, there was this notion that if you go to college, you get the sheepskin, you'll be fine, right? It's just like a seal of approval. And it's almost like it didn't matter what you got, what degree you got, just like it doesn't matter what stock you buy. It's as long as you buy one, you're fine. And then all of a sudden it's become patently obvious over the 20 years that it depends on your skill set. And there's a lot of people who squandered $250,000 to learn nothing. And so we have a generation that's hobbled by debt. That's a disaster, but we also have people who in no way, shape, or form should be responsible for paying for that hobbling. And that's a disaster. And you can blame the schools for charging too much, but there's an arms race amongst colleges. They're to attract talent, to attract faculty, to attract good students costs a lot of money too. So it's in some sense, it's all a consequence of the inflationary Fed, right?
Well, as soon as the federal government kicked back during the Obama administration, if I recall, they basically federalized the whole student loan program, and basically anyone who could anyone with a pulse could get a student loan essentially for college at that point and take on a ton of debt. And I think we see a lot of people going to college to get degrees that really have no economic value. And I've heard you comment on some of your other interviews that it really all depends on the degree that you get, whether it's marketable, whether there's any economic demand for that degree. And we don't have that sort of filter anywhere in the process that limits people to say you can only take on the debt if you get something that's actually useful. And I don't know if that's politically viable or not to put in that type of limit. I don't know if you've thought about that, or is that a discussion at all anywhere?
Oh, yeah, I get asked all the time.
Yeah.
This is the question that's sort of, people think I'm uniquely qualified to answer. I'm not. Anyone could answer it. But it turns out that they didn't federalize it per se, but they gave the banking system complete and utter protection against default on the loans. Mm-hmm. So once you could no longer extinguish one of your college debts through bankruptcy, which itself was a scam, right? So you go to college, you get up to your ass in debt, and then you declare bankruptcy at 22, and then you start fresh, right? That's a great deal too. So I understand the motivation for trying to provide the lenders protection. As you hinted at, if you in some way try to curb that and say, look, you can apply standards to how much to whether you get debt, you can do all sorts of things, all of which would then be declared to be racist or something, right? Someone would find some way to get mad at that. And so now we have a situation where uniquely odd relative to the rest of the American system, you can't extinguish a bankruptcy no matter what. Yet you also have kids who are simply never going to be able to pay no matter what. Mm-hmm. And so it's a rock and a hard place. I don't have a solution for what's done in the past. The solution for me going forward is to come up with a funding system in which the private system buys tranches of student debt from the colleges. So if Cornell put out, say, $100 million loan package, and there was some interest rate or something, but it was paid off by the students paying a percentage of their paychecks for the next 15 years, something like that. So by definition, it's extinguishable. And if you work at McDonald's, you're going to pay a few bucks a month.
Well, they have that, don't they? It's pay as you earn or pay as you go. They have some of those programs.
Well, what that would do is that it would mean that the colleges that put out educational packages that were not extinguishable would go out of business, and that would be a plus. So I think if we cut if we cut the number of degrees in this country in half, we would be better off. I think 50% of all degrees could be taken to the dumpster.
Yeah, I think you're right. Lee?
So can we unpack this a little bit further and expand more into money supply? Years ago, the federal government came out with Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Sallie Mae, all these GSE programs. Right. How much of a contributing factor to the explosive inflation of student costs and tuition are attributable to the Sallie Mae program?
I mean, it's monstrous, right? Because you give an 18-year-old unlimited amounts of money to borrow. The frontal cortex of an 18-year-old is about the size of a walnut. They're not going to stop themselves. Their parents want them to go to school because every parent wants their kid to be a doctor or a robotologist or something. And so there's no brakes on that vehicle. And so, of course, that's going to happen. If you look at the growth in the student debt, it's almost perfectly linear. So one of the theses I have is it, remember when the student debt started to really explode was sort of 07, 08, 09. I think it was part of liquefying the system. I think it's part of, it's so linear. It's like they programmed the debt to go up. And so we're up to what, $1.5 trillion or something like that. I think that was all part of pouring money into the system through the Fed's incredibly imbecilic monetary policy.
Yeah.
So, taking the bigger picture here, we had Sallie Mae inflate the heck out of tuition. We had Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac inflate the heck out of housing.
Yep.
So going forward, I can see just a massive deflation in all those sectors, anything that was driven by this credit bubble. And then could we have inflation in like consumer goods and things like that, kind of like a counterbalance? Well, one deflates and one goes like inflation crazy?
Oh, I think so. Yeah. So the economy is like the weather. In fact, in class today, I was ranting. Once in a while, I just can't control myself. This is an organic chemistry grad course. And I started ranting about the feds being filled with morons. And I started picking on Greenspan when he said in the middle of the crisis that they had an error in their model. And I started howling. I said, that moron, what, do you leave a constant out of the equation or something? What does he think? He's an idiot, right? So I'm just wailing on the guy. Yeah, I think to the extent economics is like the weather and that complicated, to describe it as using one of two terms, inflation or deflation, is stupid, right? So the terms are just too simplistic. It's like the Roman numeral system was too stiff to invent calculus. And so the term inflation and deflation is too stiff to describe what's going on.
When you go on these, economic type of rants to your organic chemistry grad students, are they into it, or are they like, God, there goes Dave, there goes Dave again?
They're all behind masks. The best rant I ever did was in March of 07. Think where we were in March of 07. Mm-hmm. And I turned to the class out of the blue and I said, the banking system's about to collapse. And they looked at me and I said, I'm not joking. I actually said you could go to the bank, an ATM machine, and not get money out, right? That was really good. But I had been watching the subprime crisis, Bruce, since they would say, oh, so-and-so is one of the only guys who saw it coming. I know thousands of people who saw it coming. That's the most ridiculous claim I've ever seen. There were so many of us going, my God, what are these idiots doing? I wrote about it in 2002, the subprime crisis coming. And they say, oh, that's too early, you're wrong. I go, no, I called the collapse of the banking system. You make a call like that, you're right, even if you're 5 years early, right? That's a big call. I didn't call a bump in the stock market. I called the collapse of the banking system. I'm taking credit. But I turned to the class and I said this, and I said, we've got a catastrophe coming, because I could hear the cracking noises of the system at that point. What the guys who were noticing this, besides presumably some insiders, there's a thing called the market ABX index, which is the derivatives pricing index. I don't know if people still pay attention, but this thing tools along flatter than a pancake, right? This is just a derivatives market pricing, and it was at par the whole way. And then also it just started dropping. And some woman named Tanta at one of the blog sites, like, Seeking Alpha, one of those things, started blogging about the chaos underneath in the pipes of the system. And so I started to realize that it was trouble. I had a friend who worked in a hedge fund in Asia when he was young and then got rich and retired. And he sent me a copy of a letter he sent to his family, which basically says, I hate to tell you this, but now it's time to get your money out of the bank. And this was like 06. And so there were a bunch of us who were watching this going, this is going to end very, very badly. And then you got morons like Bernanke, his double 800 and his SAT doesn't buy him a cup of coffee at Starbucks. And he didn't see, or he lied. Which one pisses you off more? A guy who's that stupid or a guy who lies that much? I don't know. But he professes that I've seen the housing bubble. 125% loans and home equity withdrawals. And what part of that story was hard to see? Right? That's a mushroom cloud on the horizon. Saying, I don't see war coming. You got that mushroom cloud over there? That's war right there.
Well, how do we, let's talk about right now then, because you talk about how it was real easy to see, even if you were 5 years early, back in 2002 to 2007, that, you know, these no income verification mortgages. Yeah, of course that's going to blow up eventually. What about now? I mean, we've got the federal government is having these incredible deficits, which we bring in $4 trillion a year in tax revenue. We're spending $8 or $9 trillion this year in expenditures. So we got a $4 or $5 trillion deficit coming. The Fed's financing most of it by printing, or, you know, digitally printing, whatever it is they want to call it on their keyboard. Is this going to break? I mean, what are you foreseeing within the next couple of years? I mean,
well, let me tell you what no one saw first, and absolutely no one saw it. And that is, and I've asked people, do you know anyone who saw it? Real smart guys like Cahotis and Williams and Raul Paul and you name it, Doug Noland, Bass, you name it. I talked to a whole bunch of guys. And I say, do you know anybody even who saw the magnitude of Fed intervention in 08, 09? And so I bet you guys remember when they bailed out Bear Stearns to the tune of $30 billion, it sucked the oxygen out of the room. That is a quaint number now.
Yeah, 30 billion, like what's a rounding error?
Nobody saw $20 trillion of the banking system coming. Mm-hmm. Nobody. Within a decimal point. And so no one even saw 2 trillion coming, best I can tell, and let alone 20. So now we can see it coming. So now it's complicated because it's clear that they will do anything. They will have sex with barnyard animals. They will do anything. And so now it's very hard to predict because they've got this attitude that there is no cap. They obsessed over 700 billion. Remember that? That was like a hard sell. To them, 700 billion is just getting Maxine Waters to sign something, right? It's just
remember when the TARP loans, it failed the first time in Congress, and then the Treasury Secretary said, "No, tell them to go vote again. This one's passing."
I think that was
they were arguing over 700 billion.
I think that was kabuki theater. I think the politicians said we got to do it to save face. So I think the politicians pretended to care, and then they went back. I'm reading a book right now on Alan Dulles, and the politics in the 50s were as brutal as they are now. And I realize you can go all the way back to ancient Rome when they saw 50 emperors in 50 years. It's never been benign. I think they hid it better during some times in history. And so I was reading Gore Vidal quotes the other day. Now, Gore Vidal's on the edge of communist, and I'm a right winger. And I'm reading Gore Vidal quotes, and I'm loving every last one of them. And I go, what is it that made Gore Vidal quotes all of a sudden make sense to me? But the theory is his quotes keep returning to the theme that the average person has no idea how duped they are. And I think that's where we're at. We have no idea. The average person, oh, I got my $1,200. That's great. I go, oh my God, they just, the bailouts of this year, call it this last calendar year, are $40,000 per taxpayer. And people think, well, that's not me. Stephanie Kelton, genius MMT person there, right? MMT super queen said, oh, you're not going to have to pay for this. The government's going to pay. And I go, take her PhD and flush it down the toilet. That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard from someone who is above the level of middle school.
Yeah. Well, her argument... Yeah. I don't even want to get an MMT. That's just too.
Can't defend her. Don't try. You'll get in trouble.
I'm not trying to defend her, but my counter argument to her is, on one level, she's right. We're not going to pay it. They're going to print it, and we're going to reset the currency at some point. No one's ever going to pay that debt. It's going to keep exploding.
Inflation, the month over month inflation. So your readers, watchers, whatever, the people who hang out for 19 minutes. They have to pay close attention now to year-over-year comparisons, because right now we're in the heart of it, where it's called the basis effect, where the basis of which you're comparing year-over-year is stupidly low. So we're going to get year-over-year economic growth that's going to look great. We're going to get year-over-year, you name it, that's going to look so bizarrely out of whack. You've just got to ignore it. It's just garbage at this point. What you can pay attention to is month over month, and inflation month over month was 0.6%. That's 7% annualized. And Powell says that's transitory and not of a concern. Put a bullet in his head because he needs to be euthanized because he's too stupid to, or he's a pathological liar. You pick. You pick.
I think he's the latter.
I think everyone I talk to so many people, and I got a call from a London money manager 2 days ago. It always comes down to a combo platter: delusional, pathological liar.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's even if you believe that CPI is real. I mean, a lot of us, it's been so manipulated that if CPI is showing 0.6% month over month, you got to wonder what is it really, because CPI is so manipulated downwards.
Well, and then the one that blew into view is the Chapwood Index, which shows in the major cities for the last 7 or 8 years, 10 to 12%.
Mm-hmm.
That's very believable, being close to New York City. Right,
and especially if you throw in real estate, right? Now that Chapwood could plummet like a stone soon as the cities get bludgeoned by the mass exodus. So that number could change fast. But and of course now they're out attacking the Chapwood Index as being garbage, right? They dealt with John Williams' shadow stats being garbage, and but anyone who thinks the CPI is reflecting true inflation is just not paying attention.
It really all depends on what market basket you're using when you're calculating inflation.
And changing it every time it becomes inconvenient.
Exactly. Yeah, throwing in heuristic manipulation, whatever they call
there's
it.
There's a guy named Wolf Richter who emails all his reports. And it's one of those ones where it's like, my God, could you write more reports in one day? Is there any way you could generate more reports in one day? But the problem is they're all good. So I have to click that email link, even though it's like I get more from Wolf than I get from Amazon. And he just posted one where he showed the CPI contribution of automobiles that's been flat for 20 years. What? And you go, I don't think so. But then he shows the price of the Camry, and the price of the Camry is up 75% in 20 years. And the price of the Ford F-150 pickup is up 170% in 20 years. Those are all being hedonically adjusted back to no change. And he says, again, some guy on the internet, how could I not believe him? It's some guy on the internet. He says that's 24% of CPI. Mm-hmm. Probably another 24% is the price of software, price of chips and shit, which are always going down. So that keeps the CPI down. Mm-hmm. And then, they hedonically adjust for, if beef goes up, they say you're eating chicken. If chicken goes up, they say you're eating, grubs, right? If you can't find grubs, you're eating dirt. And if you can't eat dirt, you eat shit.
Dave, on another podcast or interview, I saw you talk about how planned obsolescence of all kinds of things.
Oh, that's a big one.
So like you contrast that with what you just said about how they're adjusting the inflation down.
So here's
it's just like go ahead, please.
It's not just planned obsolescence, which we all agree they're doing, right? Your iPhone's a great example. As soon as a new iPhone comes out, the one you have starts working poorly. Mm-hmm. So they've put some sort of virus wormy thing into the iPhone system, such when you upgrade to the new system, the old iPhones just miraculously cease to function. Mm-hmm. So that's real planned obsolescence. But if the first example I saw was one day I broke a blender that was about 50 years old. This thing was a machine, right? This wasn't just an electronic device. This was a machine. You could wood chip with this thing. And I broke the glass part, and I realized that the day I broke that glass blender, I broke a lot of wealth because that thing was probably 50 years old. I just put a refrigerator out to pasture from a cabin we have in the Adirondacks, which I'm guessing was around 1941, 42, looking on the internet. And it still worked. Now, nothing lasts like that anymore. Not only does it not last, you can't fix anything. So there's a massive, massive depreciation of consumer goods. Mm-hmm. If you buy a toy for your kids, it's broken within a week. If you buy, they say the average appliance lasts 5 to 7 years. The appliances in my house right now, but the house was built in '89, are the originals. Mm-hmm. I don't want to replace them because the next ones won't last as long. There will never be a refrigerator 70 years from now that still works. There will never be a blender that still works. Yet the blenders, as they get crappy, are considered to be cheaper and hedonically adjusted lower because they have more buttons on them.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the question is, have the CPI guys calculated not just the cost, but the unit cost, the cost per usage? And I'm sure they have not. You look at a McMansion and ask yourself, how many years? I've been doing this recently on mine, which was built in '89, which probably still had some quality in there. But the modern McMansions, which are made out of, Chinese sheetrock and you name it, how long before those McMansions have the siding starting to pull off and have the windows having to be replaced and things like that, with huge depreciation? That is a hidden inflation. They're selling a shit for cheaper and calling it cheaper when in fact the per use cost is going up, not down. And I've been writing about that for years because it's been bugging me. And our houses used to be filled. When my parents bought a new appliance, it was a wealth accumulation, right? We have a dishwasher now. Now your house is filled with depreciating assets. I have a worn out car seat in a 2014 Impreza that is on its, if I have to replace it, it will be the second replacement for the seat because the cushion is wore out. Where you slide in the car, right at that edge, the material just wore out. It'll be the second repurchase of a car seat at $500 a piece. Happened before.
So where do you see precious metals fitting into all this?
Are you a silver bug or gold bug? Which one?
I don't want to talk about Bitcoin, but I think Bitcoin and the metals are joined at the hip. And I think it's a legitimate claim that right now, at least the Bitcoin is drawing a lot of demand away from the metals. I think you have to believe that because if someone says, holy shit, I have to defend against inflation, if they go to Bitcoin instead of the metals, then the metals aren't getting the bid. So I think it has to be true. And I've had very thoughtful podcasts with hodlers who are the kind that really do understand the risk of Bitcoin. And then there's the fist pumping retail guys who think not only can no one touch them, which I am confident the long arm of the state can, but also think it'll never go down again, which says, okay, so you're in your parents' basement, aren't you? And so I think the metals right now are partially being squashed by Bitcoin. And I wish the Bitcoin hodlers well, not that well. I still would like my metals to go up. If you look at eBay and you ask what's the cost to buy a standard silver eagle, which I used to pay just a couple % over spot for, they're now running $35 to $40. Yeah. And so that tells you that there's a retail inflation that's way above spot. And whether that reflects just retail craziness, I don't know. I keep hearing rumors of 100-ounce bars being in short supply, or I no longer know what to believe. I do think they're jerking the markets around in the futures markets, but I'm not sure I believe in a sustained long-term suppression. I think it's just JP Morgan guys raping and pillaging on a daily basis.
Yeah. Gotcha. One of the things I saw you comment on recently was related to the virus shutdowns and sort of the collateral damage that's having on households these days, where we've been taking what were once previously stable households and pushing them over the edge, burning down their savings to the point where desperation is starting to creep into a lot of people's lives. Beyond just saving people from the virus with all these restrictions we're putting on, people are no longer seeing their doctors as regularly as they should. They're not getting the checkups. There's more alcoholism. There's more abuse in stressed out families. These additional collateral damages that are happening to people because of the virus shutdowns. Where do you see this? I mean, you've spoken about this before. I'd like you to tell our audience what you've said.
Well, what I said in the past when we were in full lock, we're kind of getting through that now, I hope. If that little Napoleonic tyrant Fauci has his way, we'll keep going. But I'm kind of hoping that we throw him off a cliff and we move forward with our lives. During the shutdown, there's some people who accrued more money than when they were working because they spent less They realized that their lives didn't need all the crap that we were spying and using. You don't need to go to the movies. You don't need takeout. There's all sorts of things you don't need. So I think a lot of people learn to live in a smaller footprint. I think the people who are saying that we're like a coiled spring waiting to snap out of this and there's going to be this booming economy, I think they're sniffing their breakfast a little too much. Because I see 10 million plus jobs that were not only lost, but destroyed. I see 10 million jobs that are not going to come back. And then the question is, have we ever had a situation where 10 million jobs had to be organically recreated rather than just retrieved? So if you lay off a bunch of guys at a Ford plant, when it gets back, you hire them all back. But when you destroy a person's business, that person, the guy who Taekwondo with, he's locked up, he's gone. He doesn't have the skills to do anything else. He was an 8th degree black belt in Taekwondo. What's he going to do? Deliver takeout? What's his choice?
What color belt are you?
Those people. So I think we have trouble there. Suicides, the numbers on suicides are pretty foggy, furry right now. Actually, I have a feeling maybe they're being downplayed because all the bad stories are being downplayed. I've reached I think we have a crisis of authority in the country where we don't believe anybody. We believe only what we can personally assemble into a narrative that makes sense to ourselves. And so I asked on Twitter, name for me a 3-letter agency that you trust. You go CIA, no, DOJ, no, FBI, no, right? You go down the list. The only rational answer I got was KFC. And
those are all closing, aren't they?
Yeah, well, no, the chains did well. So this was a massive corporate takeover. We industrialized all of society. We wiped out the middle class.
Yeah. And
we left room for McDonald's thrived. Oh my God,
yeah.
The lines of McDonald's were crazy. And so
Amazon, Target. Yeah. All the big box companies were allowed to stay open as essential. And we shut down all the mom and pop stores.
To bridge it. They have dirt cheap capital to bridge it, so they could borrow at nothing and they could pay it off over time. And so for them, it was just a pause that refreshes. For the guy who owns the diner, it's a death sentence. Wow. And so, and then I think suicide issues. Economists analyze death rates. Here's an interesting one. Economists don't count deaths; they count lost lives, lost years of life, and on top of that, you can also include a statistical weighting for the quality of life. So if you knock off an 86-year-old, you probably knock 2 years off their life statistically, and they're 2 shitty years. You knock off a 15-year-old because they were sheltered. You knock 70 years off their life, and they were good years. So one could argue that there's at least a 70-to-1 statistical weighting against knocking off a teenager. If you want to include quality of life, call it 150-to-1. So for every 150 dead grandparents, that's offset. Saved grandparents, that's offset by 1 dead teenager. And then the question is, therefore, how many teenagers killed themselves? How many people in their youth, relative youth, didn't go to chemotherapy? There was a bunch. There was a ton. How many people didn't go to the ER when they had chest pains and didn't even know they had a heart attack? They walked it off. How many of those are going to die? And I had 2 friends die the year before in their 50s from a heart attack. They would have been called a COVID death if it was 2020. So there's all sorts of things like that consequences. So I think we're not going to spring back economically. I think there have been huge collateral damage to this economy. I think collateral damage to our faith in the system is monumental. You can't be more disgusted with the political system. I don't have anything against Biden per se. I hated Hillary. I think Harris is a sassy scoundrel. Biden, he's a liar and a cheat, but he seems like a nice guy. But his executive decisions, his executive orders are dictatorial. And I didn't think he would do this. I thought he would
I don't think that he's necessarily aware of what he's signing.
Yeah, he's not doing it. No. He's like the colonel in MASH, where they just slip papers under him and sign them.
Yeah.
Harris isn't running it. So, but the Democrats had the opportunity to unify, and instead they put their knee on their neck and suffocated the opponents. How's that for a metaphor for the current climate?
Mm-hmm.
They chose to try to destroy their opponents. That they made the choice. You want to fight, we'll fight, right? I got into a brawl with a friend of my wife. She was going to a protest against Candace Owens. She did not. She said Candace Owens was like a commie or something. Not a commie, a white supremacist. And my wife pointed out that Candace Owens is black, so that's an interesting analysis. And I got mad at her, and I said, "Look, you're declaring war now. You're declaring war is what you're doing, and you're saying there's no rules. That's war." And I said, "Here's the deal. My team has all the goddamn guns. Do you really want to go here? I'm not a big gun guy, but damn, that the lock and load squad is not on the left now."
No. Yeah, I've seen statistics that 80-something% of the guns are owned by right wingers in the country.
So
by the way, how did the two parties flip? When I was a kid, the Republicans were big money, Wall Street, big corporation. And the union, the blue collar guys were all union, all Democrat. And now you look at who the Republicans are, they're all blue collar guys, and the Democrats are Wall Street, big money, Silicon Valley. That's a complete reversal. And it's really weird. I didn't change parties either time. How do you explain that? How do I go from a right winger and stay a right winger when the two parties flipped?
Yeah.
Dave, do you see a path out of all this mess that we have? The credit bubble, everything else?
No.
None.
We just got to go through. We just got to go through. Got to go through the hard times and get through it with a reset, a currency reset. What do you think?
Valley of death. We got to go through it. And, I don't know how. This is classic fourth turning stuff. I wrote about the fourth turning one year, many years ago, probably 2012 or something. And a friend of mine, David Einhorn, said, "Well, what do you think about that?" And I said, "Well, I'm actually only half done with the book, so you're going to have to wait." And then I kind of forgot about it, then emailed back, and he said, "Well, what do you think of that?" And then I said, "Okay, now I got to finish the damn book." But it turns out the Wall Street guys were yakking about the fourth turning, the book, as part of their modeling. They were incorporating it in their idea that society is about to implode. And that and I was talking to Grant Williams, and he said he was at a dinner table with about 8 or 10 hedge fund managers. He said every single one of them has a bug out plan. You go, what's a bug out plan? A bug out plan for uber wealthy is where you make one phone call, everything gets triggered, you drive to the airport, you get on your jet, and you fly offshore. That's a bug out plan, all triggered by a single phone call. And he was stunned by it. He gets this stuff, but he was stunned by the unanimity that the uber rich were ready to go offshore to safety. A guy I know, I've met personally, who's a distressed asset investor, said, "I've never in my life felt that I was at risk because of my political views. I am now." So he's working on his bug out plan. My bug out plan is to just go to some ultra thinly populated rural place and buy a cabin on a lake and just know that within 20 miles, there's only 10 guys. None of them have teeth. All of them own guns, and we politically agree.
Gotcha. I've heard the same thing, that a lot of these, the tech titans in California, a lot of them are buying property in New Zealand or
those guys,
Tasmania.
Those guys need a bug out plan.
Yeah. Well, if
I
you
would
listen
advise those guys to get it.
Yeah. We're going to come after them with the pitchforks one of these days, I guess. But, we've been going about our time limit, 40 minutes, and this has been really entertaining, Dave. I really have enjoyed chatting with you. I'd love to do this again with you in a couple of months as events develop. And I'm sure you're going to have a lot more comments in the future for us.
Well, one time got asked for topics, and I said, I've done enough podcasts now to realize that there's no topic I don't have an opinion on.
Yeah.
That's not actually flattering. I mean, that's kind of an insult, but I realize that there's some truth in that. Once in a while, I wave by, so I'm sure within a few hours there'll be more to bitch about. So
yeah. Well, let's keep the conversation going. We'd love to have you back sometime.
well, thank you very much.
Before you go, Dave, could I just ask one question?
Yes.
We have a lot of younger people in our forum. Do you have any advice for them going into college? Any kind of areas that they should study or industries they should think of going into?
Well, I would make sure you're not going into one of these areas where your only exit strategy is law school.
Yeah.
There's a lot of majors for which law school is operationally just the only do-over that you have available to you. So a lot of these majors were designed and incorporated when only rich kids went to college. And so sure, rich kids can study philosophy if they want, but it doesn't extinguish debt. So I'd avoid that. The other thing I actually have advised young guys is to not go down the rabbit hole that you aging farts are going down, and that I am deeply down about how bad the world is, because it is very hard to build a career and to change the world and to do wonderful things if you are convinced the system is broken. And so I don't think it's constructive when I get phone calls from 20-year-olds who are already going down the doomster rabbit hole. I go, how is this kid gonna do it? How's he gonna get his shit?
You gotta be more optimistic into your 20s, right?
Just
like Ivan. Right?
It's like running a hedge fund. You can't have a bunch of 60-year-old guys saying, "Don't do that. We'll get destroyed." Right? It doesn't work. You need to have 20-something gunslingers willing to fire at anything that moves. I would try to focus on tech. In the old days, you could say, look, you focus on English lit and become a journalist. That's gone, right? Mm-hmm. There's no one, content's free now. Guys like me write for free. And so you can't do that. So you really gotta, I think you go to college to learn something that you cannot learn on your own.
Mm-hmm. Good advice. Thank you very much, Dave. We look forward to continuing the conversation in the future.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone from the Wall Street Silver community. We have Dave Collum with us. Again, thank you, Lee Justo and Jim Lewis. We hope to see you soon. Take care, everyone.